You told law
That was cross-examination of the defendant himself in the Henry Segura trial, and it was certainly a surprise, at least for me, to see him on the witness stand. But the more I go back and listen to this, the more I think he held up relatively well on the stand. We want to bring some more analysis in with Ty Martin, an attorney who's joining us by Skype this time. So Ty, it's good to see you again.
It's good to see you, Aaron. Thanks.
All right. So you watched this defendant on the stand in his own defense in this trial in Tallahassee, Florida, and overall, I said that I thought he held up relatively well, despite all of the bad stuff he admitted to, and I think you seem to share that opinion.
I do share it. It reminded me actually of a trial that I saw when I was in law school, where almost under similar circumstances, not so much a murder, but a defendant went up on the witness stand, and he had his background, they painted him as a horrible parent. He was really a very neglectful parent. But the fact that he was up there and he was so truthful and forthcoming, it actually helped his case, because the jurors believed him. They believed, if he would be telling us all of these things now, then he certainly is telling the truth about the actual issue that they were there to hear. So that may help him in this particular instance. He seemed like he held up really well, like you said.
There's this one part, though, where I think he may have really hurt himself, and we were talking about it while we were listening to the clip, and that's this part about not really cooperating or going along with the law enforcement investigation. That part really concerned me.
Yeah, it concerned me too. Everywhere else, his testimony seemed solid. It was unchallenged, it seemed, by the prosecution. But when it came to that particular instance where he couldn't really justify, I'm not a parent. I don't know if, but I'm sure that parents out there, they have an instinct, whether a maternal or paternal instinct. Doesn't really matter if they are, in the child's life constantly, but they would certainly want to know what happened or where their child is. Especially, his testimony was that the twins were like his children. And if he was going about, business as usual, trying to schedule an appointment for his son, to his biological child in this instance, to receive, to get his hair taken care of, without, showing the remorse, that to me would probably stand out in the mind of a jury, especially a jury where school starts in a few days, and it seemed as if the judge was, trying to bend over backwards to keep the trial from interfering with the life of those jurors who were parents, duties as mothers and fathers.
Yeah, that whole thing about not really wanting to play a meaningful role in the investigation didn't sit well with me, nor did it sit well with me the lying to the police. Okay, so he's cheating on his wife. That's bad. It's deplorable. We don't like that. But if your own kid had just been murdered and he kept trying to slice and dice, well, they didn't tell me the kid was dead at that particular point, and he kept fighting back on that one issue, okay, about when exactly he learned that his own son was indeed dead. That lack of cooperation, given at least that possibility, is concerning. And I've got to couple it with this other testimony where he's saying, hey, I was throwing a football around and shooting bows and arrows with my buddy the day after. I mean, that's bizarre.
It is pretty bizarre. Again, back to parents and how they would react in normal circumstances if their child is either missing, or children that aren't theirs biologically, but he had said that he had been in their lives since they were around 2 years old. So I would suspect that his life would be topsy-turvy at this point, but it's almost as if he's trying to portray as if nothing happened and it's life as usual. And I could see where the inclination of the police is to start focusing a little bit more attention on him in that instance.
There's a couple points of this that really stick with me, but when I sit on the fence with things like this, and a few people in the chat room, I've asked them many times over again, what did you think of this? And a lot of people are agreeing that he came across pretty well, but they want to know where the remorse is. They want to know, about some of these other things that we're bringing up, and I have to take all of that and couple it along with this standard of, or rather the burden of proof in these cases, and say, well, if it's not beyond a reasonable doubt, you have to acquit.
Exactly. Exactly. You hit the nail right on the head there. Doesn't really matter about the poor parenting or the poor relationship skills of this gentleman. It really matters if the defense is able to poke holes in their case. And I'm sure your viewers and the people in the chat room have heard this on a basis of ad nauseum, that if they're able to poke holes, they could probably get the defendant off of this case. And as we started out with, and I think going forward we're going to continue mentioning this, I think he held up pretty well on the witness stand. There may be that issue that we just talked about with his the remorse, or maybe the trying to portray himself as life as usual, even though that this terrible, horrific incident happened. It will, in some instances, affect the normal person, but it comes off as really horrible for him. But again, on the witness stand, he held up pretty well, and I don't think that the cross-examination even really did the effect of shaking his resolve. He was basically unshakable.
I agree with that. He had a comeback for every one of the questions asked of him, but we were just talking with our previous guest about this. I think the cross-examination by the state was garbage in this case. I don't think they did a good job at all. I mean, they were pretty much just letting him tell his own story again. Well, that's what his own attorney's supposed to be for. What's going on in this thing? If you've got a guy on the hook who's supposed to be there on 4 first-degree murders, he premeditated them, that's what the charge is. He thought of this up ahead of time, that's what the state's claiming. He killed his own kid, piled the bodies up in a bathtub. Just going to sit there and let him tell his own story?
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense. The way the cross-examination went just makes no sense to me.
Right. It seems like very cold-blooded stuff that they would be able to, really harp on and pick at it and throw him off his game and make him really trip over his own words. But the prosecutor didn't do that. I don't know if the theory of the strategy of the prosecution, I should say, was to, just kind of let him talk. But they just let him talk, and everything that he said seemed right. Maybe the prosecutor felt like he has a slam dunk case. Maybe he got a little bit arrogant in terms of, I think I've got this. There's really no need for me to shake him, But in normal circumstances, when you have the defendant on the witness stand, that's the time. It's so rare that you'll get a defendant on the witness stand, because obviously they don't have to be there, that if he is there, that's the time to pick at him. That's the time to be a vulture and a hawk in the courtroom. Not, but this opportunity he let slip by.
Oh, let it more than slip by. I mean, he may have snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, but we've got all this other weird stuff in this case. We've got the DNA that and again, I know that it's not quite as clear cut as some other DNA evidence. I'm trying to follow this along with what's going on in court. There's so much stuff that hasn't made it in front of the jury, but we'll get in that in a couple of minutes here. I want to continue listening to our last clip of the cross-examination of Henry Segura himself, and Ty, hang in there with us. We'll be back in a second.
Will do.
And in fact, they ask you again later on, maybe that Brandy was calling you because you wanted all I was there for was to hang out with Javante, right?
They also asked me if I had sex. I was in a relationship with Natasha. I told.
And in fact, they asked you again later on, maybe that Brandy was calling you because you wanted to rekindle the relationship a little bit. And you said, nope, I saw no signs you wanted to rekindle the relationship. All I was there for was to hang out with Javante, right?
They also asked me if I had sex. I was in a relationship with Natasha. I told them no, I wasn't, because I didn't want my wife to find out anything about any of that stuff.
They even confronted you again with the fact that something was going on. But you and Brandy had something going on. And you said no.
We did have something going on, but I didn't feel like it was their business. You know, we was having sex. Didn't have
You're
anything
investigating the murder of her and
exactly,
your son
a
and
murder.
your daughters.
Yes, exactly. That has nothing to do with me having sex with someone. My sexual life doesn't have anything to do with someone getting killed.
Your sexual life the day of the murders has got nothing to do with the investigation of the murder?
I didn't see it had anything to do with it at that time. No, I didn't.
Okay. Yet through all of that, you really didn't have a problem telling him that you went over there on Wednesday, did you?
No, sir. We didn't have
You
sex
admitted
that
that,
day.
didn't you?
Yeah. I wasn't there but a few minutes that day.
Not a problem admitting you were over there on Wednesday. You just had a problem admitting you were there the day of the murder. Right?
I had a problem admitting I was over there when I know we was having sex, and I was there hanging out with her and the kids for a couple of hours.
Why wouldn't you tell me you were hanging out with your kid then? I was over on Friday. I was hanging out with my kid. You didn't tell him that, did you?
I didn't want my wife to know I was over there.
Well, your wife certainly knew you weren't home. We saw those texts. She was already on to you there, buddy.
Yeah. She's been on to me a lot, but that doesn't mean she knew what I was doing.
In fact, you told law enforcement officers that you actually received a text from Brandy on the Friday, right?
Yes, she did, yeah.
Okay. And when they asked you what it said, you said, it said, "What's up?" Right?
What's up? Why you hung up on me or something like that, yeah.
That's not what you told law enforcement.
Yeah. I don't remember what I told law enforcement, but
And what you told law enforcement was that you didn't talk to Brandy at all on that Friday except for that one text.
well, I actually talked to her like all day. We talked on the phone all day. How could I kill somebody if I'm talking to her all day?
Because they make you angry. They say things to you like, "I'm going to throw you in jail."
No, I was
You're
not
talking
worried
to her
about
all
going to
day
jail.
trying to get her to do away with the child support issues because you want to go to Afghanistan so you can earn 6 figures. And she won't do away with the child support issues on this kid that you don't even believe is yours. And you got angry.
It's nothing she could have done that made me angry enough to kill my son and them twins.
So you didn't believe it was your son.
Well, that's what they make DNA tests for.
True. And in fact, you were trying to get that DNA test done so you could get out of that child support. Another way you're trying to get out of the child
So
support.
why would I kill her and my kids before getting the results of that test?
Because of law enforcement, because the state of Florida wouldn't do the DNA test for you like they did with your other daughter.
I just had to pay $300.
Which you couldn't afford, could you?
Yes, I could have afforded it. I just wasn't home at the time. You
Now,
notice
according to that receipt that said you only had $190 left in your account
you talking about the one where I withdrew like $1,400 or $1,700?
and only had $190,000 left? Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ask or wonder what I did with the cash?
In fact, you had still, through all of this, you still denied going to her house. And in fact, you were asked over 23 times in the second interview about it. And every single time you said you didn't talk to her and you didn't go to her house. 23 times. Right?
That's correct.
And in that clip, we had one of the most critical quotes that came out of the cross-examination, rather, of the defendant in this case. He said that he assumed his sexual life on the day of the murder with the murder victim had nothing to do with the murder, and that's why he wasn't very forthcoming with the police about it. Now, Ty, does that make any sense to you whatsoever?
It seems like he's grasping for straws at that one, Aaron. I don't know, he tried to explain away the reason why he didn't tell the police the truth in the beginning, in terms of he didn't want his wife to know that he was still in relations with one of the girlfriends. But, the fact that the wife already knows about his infidelity, I think that, that again will be something that the jury will look at. Why, if his wife already knows about his proclivities, why wouldn't she be okay with it now, in the sense of trying to save his life? It seems like he would tell the truth in that instance, just because his wife would understand.
Yeah, I mean, this one part of this is one of the places where I thought, you know, he is not coming across well. He might be losing his own case for himself. It was this, and there were a couple of things we talked about before. And I said, you know, overall, he came across relatively well, but I guess the key to this is going to be how they argue it in closings when we actually get to closings. They're scheduled for next Tuesday after a brief prosecution rebuttal on Monday. So that's one of the key quotes that I'd be writing down if I were the prosecutor, and I'd be playing that one over and over. I'd be quoting it over and over in front of the jury.
Right, right. Yeah, that and the fact that he was trying to make an appointment for his son's hair, and he was playing, you know, sports and other things after the day of the incident, trying to be too normal. You know, no one, you're not supposed to be. No, it's okay not to be you know, okay, you know, you can be a basket case after the death of someone. It probably will help you out in case, you know, if someone believes that you did it, you can point to the fact that, you know, I am who I say I am. I didn't do this, and none of my actions would portray an individual who had tried to, you know, murder or had succeeded in murdering someone. He really should have just, you know, acted the part of a parent in this particular instance, and maybe even a concerned boyfriend.
Yeah, that behavior is just very, very bizarre. I will have to admit that. You know, a couple of other things here. You know, he said, well, nothing that would have done could have gotten me to kill my son. The prosecutor did shoot back with a good point there and said, well, wait a minute. You were contesting whether or not he was even your son to try to get out of the payments, which is what they're trying to say the motive was. I thought that was a good comeback.
It was a good comeback. I did get to catch that part. I thought his quip was really good, though. I think that, in my mind, is more valuable to the jurors than what the prosecution shot back with. The fact that, you know, I wouldn't have killed my kid. Money or any amount of stress from the girlfriend, the mother of my son, would have amounted in me, you know, going there and killing them or doing anything to harm them, for that matter. And there was testimony. I'd like to harken back just a little bit. Testimony to one of the other girlfriends, who, although she put him, it seems as if she put him through a lot in terms of to collect the child support from him, and he went to jail, and she collects his tax returns. It seems as if from her testimony that he's still involved in his child's life, the 8-year-old that lives in, I think, Orlando area. So I think that plays well as well with that testimony that he had prior to the response of the prosecution. I think the fact that he really was able to get that out there may play well in his favor.
It's an interesting reaction. Now, let me broaden this discussion out a little bit. Do you think that the cross-examination was way too short? I was wondering the same exact thing. You know, our previous guest was saying maybe the prosecutor's not even that sure of his case at this point, and in which case that would open up a whole can of worms about whether it's ethical to keep pushing forward with a death penalty case, especially if the prosecutor's not even that confident in it. But, you know, I'm wondering, is it possible that they sprung this thing last minute and the prosecutor wasn't even aware that he was going to get up there?
Well, he threw that ticket away. He did, because that really, if the prosecutor was not on, if he was on, his heels instead of the balls of his feet, he really threw away a golden opportunity there.
I agree. I think that look, you've got to prepare for your defendant to take the stand, regardless of whether you think your defendant's going to take the stand.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think in terms of the jury, if there are erudite individuals on the jury who, interestingly enough, I was chosen for a jury 3 weeks ago. I didn't think I was going to be chosen, but I was chosen, and they eventually put me off as the alternate, so I didn't get to deliberate with them. But there are individuals in there who are unicorns, right? A lawyer on a jury is a unicorn. So there are unicorns in the jury and individuals who are looking deeply. They're in the jury box and they're taking copious notes and they're trying to figure out, the strategy of this person or that person. That person may be in this jury right now. And hopefully for the prosecution, they're not wondering, why didn't the prosecutor ask more questions? Is he not sure of his own case? Is he not confident in himself? Was he not prepared? Is he not, willing to push the envelope when it comes to asking this defendant in a quadruple murder case, did he do it? That question could have certainly been asked. But, even though it may not have been helpful, but in terms of that avenue, that stream of just being a hard-nosed, pushing the envelope, to the point of not being too hard on the defendant, but trying to show the compassion of a prosecutor to get to the bottom of a quadruple murder case.
Yeah, I agree. Now let's ask another question here. The jury can ask questions. The jury asked one question of this guy. One. The only question that the jury asked was, what was the date that you got shot? And the answer was sometime in 2010. I forget the exact date. So yeah. Did the jury just eat this guy's words right up and agree with everything he was saying? Just say, yeah, he looks like a nice guy.
I hadn't heard that, but as you were telling me now, it strikes me as, wow, that happened, years ago. He seemed as if, maybe he's not such a bad guy. Up here, he's very calm. He probably wasn't the instigator of that event. We don't know what surrounded the shooting, but I kind of take his word for it that he maybe he didn't shoot back. Maybe other people were shooting at him, and that he'd only shoot someone in self-defense. That's fine. I have a gun. I'd probably do the same thing. I can relate. Those things are probably going through their mind. The one question, but honestly, although jurors can ask questions here in Florida, it's the prosecution's job to get those questions out there, put them out there in the universe so that the jurors can start grasping onto them, and maybe they'd have more questions. Also, maybe they're probably just nervous. We never know what's going on with the jury.
Yeah, if I were on that jury, and maybe it's my journalist instinct in having to ask hard questions, but, I would want to be asking some pretty direct questions, and I probably would have a list of 50 billion of them, having watched all that evidence go by, look, what's going on? I would have asked some much more pointed questions.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I agree with you. I certainly would have too, but we'll never know. Maybe they wanted to ask questions, or they just wanted to get out of there. Who knows?
Yeah, it was towards the end. Well, I don't know. They had a couple more hours they could have gone, but it is Friday. They have worked overtime this week, so we don't know. But the bottom line is apparently all the questions were answered because they didn't ask any. So I want to skip ahead now and listen to, or I shouldn't say skip ahead. I should say dial back. and listen to some of the testimony that was on the stand this morning from one of the crime scene reconstruction experts, a crime scene analyst. His name was Michael Knox. He got into a couple of critical things about the state of the crime scene. Again, this is a defense expert who analyzed the scene from the defense's perspective. Let's listen in.
Also, that what happened here? Okay, I don't know where that came from. There's a silver bracelet that is right here on the floor. This is the master bedroom door, and this bracelet, again, it was found right in that location. This is a close-up of that bracelet. Toward the bottom of the door, there's an impact stain, or it's a drop in flight again. This is a close-up of it. Elliptical shape, has a tail to it showing direction, so it's coming downward, strikes the door, and again, that could be either from her movements, the blood drop is being cast off, or it could be that there's interaction going on, and that would cause potentially an impact or something to her that would cause that blood to be put into flight. And then here is the door frame area to the same door, and there's some more blood there as well. Then on the wall just past that door, there's another blood stain, again another one of a blood in flight, and this is a close-up of it. So you have a blood drop that is very close to the wall. That's very, very shallow angle when it's elongated like that. If a blood drop were to hit straight on, it would be perfectly round, and then as you decrease the angle, it becomes more and more elliptical shape. So when it gets to where it's really long like that, it means it's very close to the wall. This is the wall, and you can see that the lamp is here. This is like at the end of the hallway. You're kind of going into the living room right here. And again, there's blood here as well. These are, what you have is some blood that is deposited, and then you've got dripping. The blood is actually running down the wall. And there's some here, a little bit of a swipe indicating direction, and up here a little bit of a swipe indicating direction. Most likely Brandy Peters making contact with the wall, moving toward the front door. This is the east wall of the hallway. So again, you can see the front door here. So where we were just looking at the wall on the right, this is now on the wall on the left in the same orientation. And where this yellow circle is, there's another blood stain right there. And that one is this stain, again, very, it's directional, pointing toward the front door, very close to the wall. And that is another indicator of her path of travel toward the front door. And then this is an earring that is found near that wall on the floor. As you go out toward the living room area, you see that there's a number of scattered items about. There's this plant that's been overturned here, and then it continues toward where the front door is. This is the front door, and what we'll see here, there's actually some blood right outside, and in fairly small quantities, similar to what you see in the hallway. So what that would mean is that she's gotten not only to the front door, but actually made it outside the front door. And then as she goes outside the front door, there's some impact spatter on the wall. So the front door would be this to the left right here. There's impact spatter, a swipe right there. The impact spatter means that she's struck at that point. That you have an impact that's causing blood to spatter, and you have multiple drops that are traveling, and they all sort of converge back to a common location. So that means that what happens is she gets out the door, and then there's a continuation in violence. So once she gets out the front door, then she's attacked again. There's some blows delivered that cause this impact spatter.
How high off the ground is that impact spatter?
That spatter is about looks like, I think in the neighborhood of about 4.5 feet or so, 4 feet. Might be a little bit higher. This is based on what you have here as far as the angles. Then she's still upright, definitely, and that there's some type of impact happening while she's upright.
And the small quantity of blood, maybe you mentioned this, but I just want to make sure I understand. So we know that she's made it out of the house before she sustained the types of debilitating injuries that we see, which ultimately caused her death. Is that right?
Right, exactly. Because as I said, here you have very little blood. You're not dripping blood all over, as opposed to when you go back into the foyer area, there's a substantial amount of blood, which means that the majority of her injuries happen after she's outside, and then comes back into the foyer area, and then there's substantially more violence that takes place there. So that's how you're able to sort of sequence based on the volume of blood, because the volume of blood would always be increasing, not decreasing.
Were you able to tell, or are you about to tell us what the directionality of that impact spatter in this slide is?
The impact spatter, the directionality is this way. So it's converging down here, which means that the location where the blood source is. So if she's got a wound and there's an impact that happens to that wound, would be at roughly this height in this area here. And then these drops are spattering out this way. So it's an impact that is viewed in the photograph would be generally a right to left impact with probably some upward angle, because you have drops that are going upward as opposed to, there's very few that are actually traveling downward there. Then this is the swipe, a little closer view of it. The swipe also has direction indicated by it. That direction is back toward the door. So again, this is how you can determine that she comes outside and then she's stopped at some point and then is moved back into the foyer area, because that swipe is now going back in the opposite direction. All the ones we saw in the hall were all moving out toward the door. Now you have a swipe that's moving back from the outside back toward the inside of the house. And then you have, again, this is a little bit closer of the impact stains, and one of the key things here is that you have some differences in direction, so there's more than one. You couldn't tell you exactly how many, but there's not just, if you have one single impact, then all of the drops should converge back to one common area. Whereas if you have ones where there are differences in direction and they don't all converge to the same common area, then that would indicate that there's more than one impact. So, certainly there's something happening here that correlates to the movement back into the foyer.
Does the different directionality of the impact spatter indicate that the impacts are being inflicted from different angles?
Yes, it would generally mean that there's some slightly different angles. Now that can be, if I'm striking somebody like this, I mean, no two blows are going to be exactly the same, strike exactly the same way, but yes, there's some variance in that.
And with these ones here, are some of them moving in opposite directions?
Yes, yeah, there are actually some opposites where you have downward left to right. This one down here is actually the drop direction is downward left to right, and then you have this one left to right, and then you have this one is upward right to left, and one that's laterally right to left. So there's more than one impact here. Then this one is just kind of showing they drew lines of convergence here, which is what we do with blood spatter impact stains, because the lines of convergence bring you back to where relative to that surface did this impact occur. So we would bring the lines of convergence down, and then you'd come straight out from that some distance that we're able to measure through measuring the angles of the drops, and you can figure out exactly how far away it happened. But the key thing is that those lines of convergence means that wherever the blood letting wound is that's impacted is right about here, and you can kind of see that sort of doorknob height, roughly in that level. Then this is just orientation. That spatter that we were just looking at is right here relative to the door. Here's the front door, and that's where that spatter is. So it's just outside the door, just a few feet outside the door. And just to point out that purplish discoloration all over the door, that's where the leucocrystal violet was used to process the door. Typically when you see...
That was Michael Knox, a crime scene reconstructionist on the witness stand from earlier today. He's spitting out some interesting buzzwords there, things like continuation of violence, and he just talks about this being a prolonged violent attack. So Ty, we were just talking a couple of seconds ago about the causes of death here. Apparently 2 of the children were drowned. The mother was shot. And, we've got another child shot, if I'm remembering the medical examiner's testimony correctly. This crime scene picture that's being painted seems like it's perhaps something that that this defendant might not have been able to do alone, and I think that the defense wants people to go there.
Right. It's a bit gruesome for one person who I guess has never killed someone before to carry out all of these murders in such a cold-blooded manner, right? The defense wanted to paint the guy as someone who loved the 2 children, took them as his own children, the twins, and they called him dad. And then he had a child with the lady as well. So there has to be some feelings there for between him and the 4 individuals who unfortunately passed or died, was murdered. And so they're trying to say certainly that the only thing he should be guilty of is maybe lying to the police about his whereabouts. He's definitely not guilty of murder. And the fact that they're painting, one of their witnesses is painting this as such a horrific incident that he couldn't have done on his own. And their theory of there has to be some either, I think Los Zetas or something, that the Mexican cartel that was involved, or even the, I believe one of the things was also some gentleman from jail who wanted to marry her for citizenship or something. So certainly couldn't have been the defendant.
There are all these bizarre explanations going out there. We've got somebody else's DNA apparently on the crime scene. I know that the testing isn't as sure because it was mixed in with another sample, but you've got that going on. You've got multiple other people claiming responsibility from behind bars, and I've sort of dismissed some of those theories because it turns out that the one guy who claimed responsibility from behind bars had also claimed responsibility to other crimes that he could never have committed because he was incarcerated when he was said to have committed them. But then it turns out the guy had been writing to the victim, and there's evidence of letters that he had sent to the victim, but a lot of that stuff didn't even get in front of the jury.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to unravel all the facts on this thing. The facts are crazy. Trying to unravel them is crazy, and trying to wash them through the rules of evidence is a Herculean feat. What's relevant, what's not? Is this unfair confusion? Is it not? Is it just going to confuse the jury, or is it not? If a guy has a habit of sitting behind bars and confessing to additional crimes that he could not have committed because he was incarcerated when the crimes happened, but he had corresponded with the victim, do we put that guy on the stand? Well, they couldn't put him on the stand because he said he would plead the Fifth if he was called.
Right.
So it's like, how do we make sense of it, let alone let the jury hear it?
Exactly. It's a tough one, but I think that there is enough. There's still enough, although there are tons of things that we know about that the jury will never see as a collective body. There's still enough, I think, for them to arrive at the fact that, especially from today's testimony and I guess the ineffectiveness of the prosecution's cross-examination, that there could still be reasonable doubt as to the defendant's guiltiness. And going back to, I guess, what the expert that was on today testifying about, the blood splatter and the severity of this and just the horrendousness of the and horrific crime that was undertaken here. I think it's all tying together. When we get to closing arguments next week, I think that the defense is going to be able to tie all of those things in and help their client out.
I want to listen to at least one more clip here. This is the crime scene analyst, the reconstructionist on the stand from this morning. Here's where he talks about the ultimate lack of DNA from the defendant at the crime scene and in the defendant's truck.
Actual unburned and partially burned powder particles that come out of the muzzle strike around the wound and actually make abrasions or even embed into the skin. Soot is basically like from the smoke. I mean, if you've ever, had a fire in a fireplace and then you've gone in and touched it and you end up with this black stuff all over your hand, it's similar to that. It's the byproducts of the combustion that get deposited. Soot does not travel nearly as far as the powder particles do. So what you'll typically see is very close range. You'll see potentially stippling as well as soot. And then as you move away, the soot disappears, powder particles can continue, and then you reach a certain distance where you're not seeing any of it.
Okay. And when you have soot deposit like that, obviously the victim here was found in a bathtub. Would merely being in a bathtub, would you expect that to cause the soot to go away, or would you expect there to have to be some sort of scrubbing or rubbing to get soot off of a person once it's been deposited?
Soot is not permanent by any stretch. The powder particles pretty much are. You're not getting rid of that because you're actually doing abrasion damage to the skin. The soot is not permanent, but generally it doesn't just come off just because of application of water. I can't say that's impossible, but if you anytime a wound is cleaned or anything like that, I mean there's generally some scrubbing that's done in order to clean a wound and be able to see those. So it doesn't come off, super easily, but it does come off.
Okay. In order for it to come off, would you expect there to have to be some sort of cleaning or scrubbing of the wound as you just described?
I think so. There would be more than just simply being submerged in water to have complete absence of
Okay.
soot.
And with respect to Maya, you showed us the different saturation patterns in the carpet and the tile. Were any of those saturation patterns from Tamaya?
Let me back up and see, make sure I'm following your question. The patterns, where were you talking about?
In the living room where you showed us large patterns of blood saturation?
I think all of the saturation that was near the foyer and stuff on the carpet was Brandy Peters. I'm not sure if there was anything.
And if there's no saturation from Tamaya after having suffered a gunshot wound on the ground anywhere, what would that tell you?
Well, what it would tell you is that that wherever she's found is probably very close in proximity to where the gunshot wound took place. Obviously, if she was shot at another location outside of, removed from the bathroom where she's found with a gunshot wound, then that would have bled pretty quickly after the wound is inflicted. And so if she was, in any position other than up and moving, then you would expect that there would be at least some blood deposition. So if she falls down after being shot, it's put down, then you're going to see some blood deposition somewhere where that occurred. So if, in absence of that, then it would mean that she's likely shot very close to where she's actually found.
Okay. And some of the blood swipe patterns, if you could go back to those, going into the bathroom. Those were tested, right? Both the blood on the floor and the blood swipe pattern going into the bathroom where Tamaya and the other kids were found. Those were tested, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that blood was consistent with Tamaya's?
Let me catch up to you here. Yes, that swipe mark going in is consistent with either one of the twins, but certainly Tamaya would be the explanation.
And neither of the twins had any other injuries of any kind besides Tamaya having that gunshot wound, correct?
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
So we've got a lot of things going on in that clip there, Ty. Discussion about the truck, discussion about whether or not blood was found in the truck. It wasn't. If they're trying to say that the defendant was injured, and I know the injury wasn't horrendously severe, but it's more likely that there would have been blood in the truck. There's no DNA or fingerprints to connect people to the crimes. So, or at least this defendant to the crime. His DNA is not in the crime scene. And yet we've got these other hits that are coming up. They're partial hits, but they're coming up. Somebody, and yet another person's DNA is underneath the victim's fingernails. I'm starting to add this up and say from a forensic standpoint, it's not a surprise that the defense expert who was just on the stand in that clip is saying that there should have been more done to investigate this, and yet they stopped with the usual suspect.
Exactly. It's the fact that, they had just mentioned that she put up such a fight. I think they mentioned something about her broken fingernail and how she blood was outside and then blood came back inside, and the defendant has no blood on him and no blood in his truck. And I believe someone had testified earlier that his truck, they knew his truck, he had a distinctive truck. I think he mentioned, the defendant mentioned that his truck was distinctive. It had like a hood scoop or a spoiler on the back.
Oh yeah, the pictures of the truck, I mean, it was all pimped out. He had a custom ride, so his truck was distinctive. That's why he said when he was on the stand that he used to park it around a corner at of all places, a church, when he said he was going to go cheat on his wife with the victim.
Right.
But the bottom line is yeah, people would have noticed the truck, and that's why he said, he tried to keep it out of the neighborhood. Right,
and even if he had parked it around the corner, having completed the task of murdering these people with blood dripping and blood on him, some blood would have probably trailed somewhere to the truck, and his blood would have probably gotten on the handle, or her blood, or one of the children's blood. So it's kind of iffy in terms of. I think they did a really good job of having this particular witness on the stand to kind of paint how horrible this thing was, and the fact that the prosecution may have done an incomplete investigation, possibly. Don't blame the defense for the prosecution's incomplete investigation. If there were things to have been found and they didn't find it, there's reasonable doubt. That's certainly what I got from this testimony.
And that's exactly where I was going to go. I mean, how does the defense do closing arguments next Tuesday? It sounds to me that we're in agreement that the closing argument needs to talk a lot about burden of proof.
Right. The things that they could have found, but they didn't. And they can't now pull it out of thin air. It's not there. It doesn't exist. So if, as we've all known, and it's now like an adage now that if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. So that's how I think it's going to probably go next week in terms of closing argument. It's going to be hard to figure out what the prosecution's going to argue. Certainly, they're going to say he did this because of the $20,000 he owed in back child support, but obviously he didn't care about having multiple children out there. So why would one think that in this instance he'd kill this person just for the child support? The women abound for him, and he certainly could have, carried out the acts on any number of the women out there who have children for him.
Yeah, I'm having issues with this being a conviction, but we'll see what the jury decides. So that'll come up next week, though. Ty Martin, attorney from out of town, joining us from the Sunshine State, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, well, enjoy it. It is hot and sunny up here in the Northeast, though, today, I will mention. So you did not corral all of the nice weather for your own enjoyment this weekend.
I'm sure it's warmer in New York than it is in Florida.
Well, sometimes it is, but anyway, good to see you again, Ty. We'll catch you next